I shouldn't remember the way her voice sounded that clearly. But I do. Careful with that ladder, she said, like the words were a habit. I laughed it off, trying not to glance down at her again. The sunlight caught in her hair, and for a second I lost focus. The screwdriver slipped, clattering against the gutter. My chest tightened, not from the height, but from her watching me. I was only supposed to be fixing a loose panel on the porch roof. 5 minutes, maybe 10. My mom had asked me to help her friend out, nothing more. A simple favor. But it stopped being simple the moment I caught the way she looked at me, then quickly looked away, like she wasn't supposed to notice. She was in her late 40s, maybe, though the number felt meaningless. She carried herself with that quiet weight of someone who had lived enough to stop pretending. No makeup, hair pinned up loosely, paint smudges on her wrist like she'd been working on something before I arrived. She was beautiful in a way that felt unintentional, dangerous even. "You don't have to rush," she called up again. Her voice was calm, but her hands tightened around the mug she was holding. I noticed everything, the way her fingers tapped against ceramic, the way she tilted her head slightly, like she was measuring me without meaning to. I finished the repair, climbed down, and wiped my hands on my shirt. Too aware of her standing close, I almost wished for another screw to tighten, just to keep busy. "Thank you," she said. Simple, direct. But her eyes lingered longer than her words did. I nodded, trying not to stare at her lips. "No problem. It was loose, that's all." There was a silence then, the kind that stretched a little too far, like both of us were waiting for the other to move first. A bird landed on the railing, chirped once, and flew away. She shifted her weight, then gestured toward the door. "You can wash up inside, if you'd like." Her tone was polite, but something else threaded beneath it, hesitation, maybe curiosity. I told myself I imagined it, yet my pulse betrayed me. Inside, her house was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence where you hear your own breathing. I followed her to the kitchen, where she set the mug down on the counter. "Your mom said you've been busy with classes," she said, as if she needed to fill the space with anything but silence. "Yeah," I replied. "Feels like I barely leave the library." She smiled faintly. Not forced, but not free either. Like smiling had become a habit she'd almost forgotten how to enjoy. I couldn't stop staring. I rinsed my hands in the sink. She stood only a few feet away, leaning against the counter, arms crossed. She didn't look at me directly, but I felt the weight of her attention all the same. "You remind me," she began, then stopped herself. Her eyes flickered sharp, as if she'd stepped too close to a line. I turned, water dripping from my hands, waiting. She exhaled, shook her head slightly. "Never mind." Her voice was softer now, lower. The kind of tone you only use when you've said too much already. The air thickened between us. I dried my hands slowly, giving her time to look away. She didn't. And then it happened, so small it could have been nothing, so heavy it felt like everything. As I brushed past her to hang the towel back, my arm grazed hers. Neither of us moved. Her breath caught, barely audible. Mine stopped completely. When she finally spoke, her words were almost a whisper. "You don't know how dangerous this is." And then she looked at me, really looked, as if the warning itself was already too late. Her words hung between us like smoke. Dangerous. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't stepped back, but I could feel the wall she was building and how thin it really was. I wanted to ask what she meant, but I already knew. My mom's friend. Mid-40s. Freshly divorced, I'd overheard it in my mother's kitchen weeks ago, whispered in the kind of tone people use when they're not sure if sympathy is welcome. And me, 22, still fumbling through lectures, part-time jobs, nights of cheap coffee and cheaper excuses. That gap between us, age, experience, history, was exactly what made her warning true. Exactly what made it impossible to leave. She broke the silence first, turning away, as if rearranging the fruit bowl on the counter could undo the slip of her words. Her hands trembled, just slightly, when she set down an apple. "You don't have to stay longer," she said quickly. "I didn't mean." But I cut her off, not with words, but by stepping closer, enough to notice the scent of paint and coffee clinging to her shirt. Enough to see the fine lines at the corner of her eyes, not flaws, but maps of years I hadn't lived. "I don't mind staying," I said softly. Too soft. Her jaw tightened, like she'd heard something I hadn't meant to reveal. I filled the quiet again, because silence with her felt unbearable. "I mean, you've probably had enough people leave lately." The moment the words slipped, regret burned hot in my chest. Too direct. Too cruel, maybe. Her lips parted, then pressed shut again. She looked at me, really looked, and for the first time I didn't see just caution, I saw exhaustion. The kind of weight you can't cover with polite smiles and half-finished sentences. "You don't know the half of it," she murmured. Her vulnerability cracked something open in me. I wanted to ask. To know. To step into the space she kept closed off from everyone else. But instead, I just nodded, pretending I hadn't noticed the way her hand gripped the edge of the counter like she needed something solid. The kitchen clock ticked too loudly. My heart beat out of rhythm with it. I found myself studying the smallest details to steady myself. The faint smudge of blue paint on her forearm, the chipped corner of her mug, the way her hair had loosened from its pin and curled against her neck. Every detail made her more real. More unreachable. More dangerous. She finally broke the stillness by exhaling sharply. I shouldn't have said anything. But she didn't move away when I shifted closer, didn't flinch when my arm brushed hers again. The air between us wasn't still anymore, it pulsed, almost unbearable. And then, before I could think of something safe to say, she laid her hand gently on my arm. Not a mistake. Not an accident. A choice. "Stay a little longer," she said. Her voice was steady this time, but her eyes betrayed her, wide, searching, afraid of her own words. I swallowed, my throat dry. Every part of me wanted to answer, but the only thing that escaped was silence. And in that silence, the line between what we were and what we were becoming thinned to almost nothing. Her hand on my arm lingered longer than it should have. Just skin against skin, nothing more, but it sent a current through me I couldn't disguise. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but the words snagged in my throat. She seemed to notice, because she drew back a fraction, not enough to break the connection, just enough to remind me of the distance she was still trying to keep. "You shouldn't look at me like that," she whispered. The protest came too fast. "I'm not." But I was. And we both knew it. She turned her head, almost as if she couldn't bear the weight of being seen so clearly. For the first time, her composure cracked, the corners of her eyes shimmered, her lips parted with a breath she never released. I wanted to ask what she was holding back. What wound she was protecting so carefully. Instead, I muttered, "You deserve someone who doesn't make you feel like you're breaking a rule." Her laugh was small, almost bitter. "That's exactly the problem, isn't it?" Before I could answer, the sharp buzz of her phone cut through the moment. We both flinched. She grabbed it quickly, glancing at the screen, then turning it face down without replying. I caught only a glimpse of the name, Mark. My chest tightened, though I had no right to feel anything about it. "Sorry," she said, her voice low. She didn't explain, and I didn't press, though my mind spun with questions I had no claim to ask. The silence after the interruption was heavier than before. She rubbed her arm absent-mindedly where my hand had brushed hers earlier, like the touch had left an imprint she couldn't shake. I told myself to step back. To leave before I said something reckless. But then she moved toward the sink, and a loose strand of hair fell against her cheek. I reached out without thinking, tucking it behind her ear. The gesture froze us both. My hand lingered too long. Her eyes locked onto mine, wide, startled, vulnerable. I whispered, "Sorry," but didn't pull away fast enough. Her breath trembled as she spoke. You don't need to be. It would have been so easy then. One step closer. One word more. The distance between us had never been so thin. And that was when the knock came. 3 short raps at the front door, sharp enough to jolt us apart. She exhaled quickly, pressing her hands flat on the counter, as if grounding herself. I shoved my hands into my pockets, trying to look like I hadn't just crossed the line I couldn't uncross. Neither of us moved to answer right away. We just stared at each other, both breathing too fast, the sound of the knock echoing in the space we hadn't filled with words. Finally, she whispered, "If you stay, things will change." The knock came again. Louder this time. And in that suspended moment, with her eyes locked to mine, I didn't know whether I was about to leave, or finally step across the line she tried so hard to draw. The knock finally faded into silence. Whoever it was had given up, leaving behind a ringing stillness that pressed down heavier than the sound itself. She still hadn't moved from the counter. Her hands were flat, knuckles pale against the wood. Her breath rose and fell too quickly, and when she finally turned to me, her eyes were sharp, not angry, but unguarded in a way that made my chest ache. "You should go," she said. I nodded, but I didn't move. My body betrayed me, rooted to the tile floor, waiting for her to take it back. She noticed. "Why are you still here?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. "Because I don't want to leave." Her jaw tightened. That wasn't the answer she wanted, and yet she didn't tell me to go again. Instead, she let out a shaky laugh, almost bitter. "You're too young to understand what this would cost me. I understand more than you think." Her eyes flickered with something I couldn't name. Regret? Anger? Longing? She turned away, running her hand through her hair in frustration. "You don't. Don't say it," I interrupted. My voice was sharper than I meant it to be. That made her pause. She looked at me then, really looked, like she was seeing me for the first time, not as a favor her friend's son was doing, not as a distraction, but as a man standing in front of her, refusing to back down. Her lips parted. "You remind me of him." The words cut deeper than I expected. I swallowed hard. "Your ex?" She nodded once. "When we were young. Before everything fell apart." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she pressed her hand to her mouth, as if she'd said too much. I stepped closer without thinking. "Then maybe you're remembering what it feels like to be wanted." The silence that followed was unbearable. She dropped her hand slowly, her eyes wide, fixed on me like I'd stripped away every wall she'd built. "That's not fair," she whispered. "Neither is pretending you don't feel this." Her breath caught, and in that moment, there was no space left between us. I could see the tremble in her lips, the way her fingers curled against the counter like she needed something to hold on to. "I can't," she started, but the rest of the sentence never came. I leaned closer, not touching her, not yet, just close enough to feel her warmth, close enough for the air itself to shake. "Tell me to stop," I said quietly. Her eyes searched mine, desperate, torn, and for the first time she didn't look away. But she didn't say stop. She just stared, the silence so loaded it felt like the whole house was holding its breath. And then, almost too faint to hear, she asked the question that split everything open. "What if I don't want you to?" Her question, "What if I don't want you to?" still hung between us when the world broke the silence. The phone on the counter lit up again. This time it didn't buzz quietly, it rang. Loud, insistent. She startled, fumbling to flip it over. The name flashed clear this time. Mom. My stomach dropped. Not hers. Mine. I froze, staring at the glow of my mother's name on her screen. She realized the moment I did, the blood drained from her face. Neither of us moved. The phone kept ringing. Finally, she answered, her voice brittle. "Hello?" I could hear my mother's voice faintly on the other end, casual, unaware. Something about dinner plans. She forced a laugh, her tone sharp with practiced ease. Yes, yes, everything's fine. He just helped with the porch. Yes, tell him thank you again. My name. My name, spoken lightly, as if I wasn't standing inches away from her, watching her try to seal away what had almost happened. She hung up quickly, the silence afterward heavier than before. I couldn't help it, the words burst out. She doesn't know. Her shoulders slumped. She can never know. I shook my head, heat rising in my chest. You're acting like we've done something wrong. Her eyes met mine, sharp, wounded. Haven't we? That stopped me. For a moment I saw it from her side, my mother's oldest friend, freshly divorced, carrying regret like a second skin. And me, young enough to still believe desire could outweigh consequence. She turned away, pressing her palms to the counter. Her voice dropped. When your mother took me in after the divorce, I promised her I wouldn't make things messy. Wouldn't what? I demanded, stepping closer. Wouldn't feel anything? She spun then, eyes wet, face unguarded in a way that gutted me. You remind me of what I lost. Of who I used to be. And it terrifies me. The confession hit harder than I expected. This wasn't about age, or rules, or even my mother. This was about her, standing on the edge of rediscovering something she thought she'd buried. I swallowed, my voice rough. And what if I'm not him? What if I'm just me? The words cracked something open in her. Her lips parted, trembling, but no sound came. She reached out like she might touch me, then pulled back at the last second. Her restraint hurt worse than rejection. I stepped closer anyway, unable to stop myself. You don't have to keep pretending. Her eyes locked on mine, wide and terrified and wanting all at once. If we do this, she whispered, I lose her. I lose your mother. I lose everything. The air between us pulsed, sharp with the truth laid bare. And before I could answer, before I could tell her that I didn't care, that I'd already crossed the line in my heart, she asked the question that twisted everything. Are you worth that? Her question, are you worth that? Rang louder than any knock or phone call. I didn't answer right away. My throat locked, my mind scrambled for words that didn't sound naive, reckless. Because maybe I wasn't worth it. Maybe no one was. But the way she looked at me, raw, afraid, holding herself together with trembling hands, I couldn't lie. I don't know if I'm worth it, I said finally. My voice cracked, low and unsteady. But I know I'd never forgive myself if I walked away now. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She just stared, like she wanted to believe me but didn't know how. I stepped closer, closing the space she'd been clinging to. My voice softened. I see you. Not the version you think you've lost. Not who you were. You right now. Her breath shuddered out of her chest, and her hand rose halfway, hesitated, then finally pressed against mine. The touch was gentle, almost fragile, but it carried the weight of everything we hadn't said. This is madness, she whispered. Maybe, I admitted. But it's real. She closed her eyes as if hearing that was both relief and punishment. For a moment I thought she would let go, pull away, end it before it began. But instead she held tighter. I've spent years pretending, she said, her voice shaking. Smiling through dinners, nodding through conversations, convincing myself I wasn't lonely. And then you show up, and suddenly I remember what it's like to feel something I can't control. The confession undid me. Every wall I'd built to protect myself from wanting her too much crumbled in an instant. I leaned in, close enough that our foreheads touched, close enough to feel the warmth of her breath. Then don't control it. For a long, suspended beat, either of us moved. The whole house seemed to hold its breath with us. Then she whispered, God help me, and closed the last inch between us. Her lips met mine, tentative at first, like testing the weight of a decision she couldn't undo. But when I didn't pull back, when I pressed into the kiss with everything I'd been holding back for days, weeks, years of silent wanting, she gave in. Fully. The kiss was not neat, not polished. It was desperate, trembling, almost broken, but it was real. Her hand slid to my jaw, mine to her waist, both of us clutching like the world might tear us apart if we let go. When we finally broke for air, she rested her forehead against mine, eyes still closed. "I can't promise this won't destroy me," she whispered. I shook my head. "I don't want promises. Just, don't let this be nothing." Her eyes opened then, glassy and fierce. "It could never be nothing." The silence that followed was no longer avoidance. It was agreement. A vow carved into the air between us, fragile but unshakable. And for the first time since I climbed that ladder, I knew I wasn't leaving. The house had grown darker without us noticing, the last threads of daylight fading through the blinds. We were still standing in the kitchen, close enough to feel each other's warmth, the air still charged from what had just happened. She hadn't let go of my hand. I think that surprised her more than the kiss itself. She glanced down at our joined fingers like they belonged to someone else, then back at me with a quiet expression I hadn't seen before, not fear, not regret, but something softer. For the first time since this started, she smiled without forcing it. It wasn't bright, it wasn't wide, but it was real. "Do you have any idea how much trouble this could bring?" she asked, though her voice carried no warning this time. "Probably," I said, and tightened my grip. "But trouble feels better than pretending we don't want this." Her laugh was small, shaky, but it cut through the heaviness like a light breaking open. She leaned against me then, resting her forehead briefly on my shoulder. I felt her relax, not completely, not like all the fear was gone, but enough to know she'd chosen to stay in this moment. With me. "I don't know where this goes," she admitted. "I can't promise it won't hurt." "Then don't promise," I whispered. "Just be here." That was the only answer she gave, her silence, her weight leaning into mine, her hand staying in mine instead of pulling away. And in that quiet, I knew something had shifted. We weren't pretending anymore. We weren't circling around what we felt. We had stepped into it, messy and imperfect and terrifying. The knock at the door, the phone calls, the rules, all of it was still waiting for us outside. But in that kitchen, in that fragile pocket of honesty, none of it mattered. What mattered was that she let herself be seen, and I refused to look away. When I left later that night, it wasn't with a goodbye. It was with her voice, low and certain, saying, "Come back tomorrow." And I did. Looking back, I realized this wasn't a story about danger, not really. It was about what happens when you stop hiding, when regret collides with longing, and two people finally decide they'd rather face the risk than live with silence. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't safe. But it was real. And that made it worth everything. Sparkles, did you enjoy the story? Speech Balloon, what kind of stories would you like to hear next? More forbidden romance, emotional slow burn love, or something entirely different?